about, you probably think about a financial network. And it's true, Mastercard's financial network was its first product. It's a very important product. It generates a lot of revenue for Mastercard, but it's not our only product. Mastercard has about 200 different products and services that we offer to issuers, acquirers, merchants, and even consumers directly, independent of whether or not they switch on the Mastercard network. But the one thing all of these products do rely on is data, either data that we've created in our own environment or data that we've ingested from third parties. Probably the most important data, the data that most of our products rely on, is location data. But if you're familiar with financial transactions, particularly how messy the data is that acquirers provide, you know how difficult it is to integrate transaction data with location data. So John's going to give us an overview on our process, what we do, and then we'll go on. Oh, I get it. Thank you.
So if I mess up, you can just keep clicking. So in looking at this, a little bit technical, I'll try to keep it high level, but from the point of this being, just to start with, I don't know if you've really ever looked at your credit card statement. I mean, like looked at it, not just what you spent and how you bought it, for example, a pair of green shoes. But more importantly, the actual name of the merchant, which I've given you props. I do want to know the name of the merchant. But if you look on the left, excuse me, your left, that first lane, that raw data that comes in, it's messy. And it's kind of ugly. So this raw data is the basis of it all, the basis of what actually comes into Spectrum. So the challenge is the scrubbing and cleansing required for this. So that second lane, the team before us was talking about all those rules and the process that they have. At Mastercard, we have over 5 million business rules that are cleaning this data. And I'm a Boomerang employee. I worked for Mastercard almost 20 years ago, and I actually wrote some of those, and they're still working today. But working with that, if you keep going, there's an aggregation that needs to happen as well. These chains need to be rolled up and constantly updated that Yum Brands is the parent of Dunkin' Donuts, and doing that globally. And now thinking about this from a scope, over 38 million merchants, and that one of the stats is 160 million transactions an hour are running through, and all that data is going to be deduped, those merchants eventually identified, and running through your software. And this is where you guys come in. The best-in-class geospatial address standardization. So we're using Spectrum, MLD, we got the geocoders, we have the boundary files, we have a few other things running in there as well between the data and the software to make all this happen. And what happens towards the end, you'll see, just as an example, you've got the firmographic and geo-enrichment data. So with this, understanding how we can not just cleanse this and make it available for us, but make it available across the enterprise. And that's what you're helping us do. And as we're going forward with additional optimization, thinking about different country-by-country analyses, because it's different. What happens in Hong Kong and Singapore is entirely different than the data that's in Australia or Canada. And even now looking at benchmarking and how we can take the PB key as part of that fabric and start to weave it in and to get some more advances going forward.
And it's key. These are fundamental enterprise assets that we use across the organization. So if I just give a simple overview on sort of how our view of data has changed over time, because I think that'll provide great context in regards to the changes that we've made as an organization. So if we start at the very beginning, back in the days of knuckle busters and carbon copy receipts, John says I should describe what a knuckle buster is, because some of you might not be aware, but a long time ago, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there were these things that you would actually like swipe on top so that you could get an imprint of the card, and that was actually how you paid with a credit card.
All right, now you're older than me. Thanks.
But back then, there was a lot of data that was created, but that data itself didn't have any intrinsic value. It was a byproduct of the operations. It wasn't used to improve any data products or create data products or improve products that could have leveraged that data. It was something that we retained for accounting purposes. Over time, though, individual product managers found opportunities where they could use that data, either to create new things that they could offer the market or to improve the delivery of the products and services that they already managed. But also during this time, this is when things like information security and data privacy and all of these other things that we're very familiar with now began to evolve. But despite all of the headwinds associated with managing data products in that sort of nascent era, there was still a lot of opportunity there, and we saw a lot of growth in those products. So fast forward to today. Like we talked about before, most of the products that are providing the growth to Mastercard are these sort of value-added services, these ancillary things that exist outside the network. But all of those either generate or require data, sometimes both, in order to operate. At the end of the day, data is at the center of it all. Mastercard understands.
Oh, I thought you were done because you forgot the click.
No, I'm doing bullets out of order, so.
Okay.
He likes to throw me off. It gives him a lot of joy. So thanks for that. So Mastercard has recognized, though, that the overall environment that we're operating in, what drives success, has changed over time. So we've done a couple things in order to adjust, to capitalize on the new opportunities presented by this information economy. First, we've developed the data office and a chief data officer position. John and I are in the data office, but our responsibility is the curation of our data assets, defining the data strategy for the organization, and the operational management of all of the different third-party data that we acquire from third parties. The other thing is to start to build enterprise data services. So these can either be data assets that we provide, or it can be the data platforms that help the individual product managers offer their products. So instead of having individual pockets of innovation across the organization that are no way aligned, our job is to create those individual data assets that can then be leveraged by the individual product managers. The key to implementing something like that is not just focusing on the technical bits, because you can build an amazing platform, we can leverage all of your tools and solutions, but if we haven't performed all of the organizational readiness activities, we will fail because there won't be adoption. So in order to effect a useful change management program at Mastercard, we've made investments in people, process, and product in addition to the platform.
Oh, cool, thanks. So in thinking about this from the people stuff, right people in the right roles. And if we look at the top quadrant, you think about it, it's mostly like, think the technology team and then the product team, not a versus, but technology, then product. But as Travis was mentioning, the formation of the CDO and the data strategy lend itself to a bit of a change. And that realignment, which we were talking about before as part of the transformation, helped bring this vision to light. So now we have the data strategy. We're starting to fundamentally change the roles of the people. And now you think about from a vendor. So we've got the internal teams realigned and the roles and how we work together, but how we leverage our vendors, specifically Pitney Bowes. So thinking about it not just as a data provider, not just as a software vendor, but actually as a partner to work with us to enable this vision that we're moving towards, that data is that asset, data is that monetization, but moving that thing forward as an enterprise deliverable.
I moved it.
Yes, thanks. So platform. I actually love this slide because this is a bit of an operational maturity. It's your current state and your future state. So I'm thinking about the point versus enterprise, single use versus the enterprise, duplication versus coordination, and consistency in the implementation. And as a Six Sigma geek, this for me is awesome because it's a consistency that you're helping us with. And even the conversations I was having last night, having actual regression models built on the data. So when we get that new tape update and we load it in, because we're an SDK and we do it on-prem, knowing what's going to change from one country to another, how the data is moving, say from an S5 to an S8, so we can be responsible and responsive to our product partners to let them know this is how the data is moving, because it changes all the time. With the merchants that you use, the terminals that are growing, the things that are happening with chip, the different acquirers like Square that comes through, and go back and actually look at your statements and you'll start to see some differences, but also some changes, and it changes day to day and month to month as we work with you to stay on top of that.
So there are two types of people. People who, when they see a process engineering slide, start to check their email on their phone, and people who get really excited. I won't be offended by either type in the audience. So when we're starting to look at the different ways that we need to restructure how we interact with all of the different stakeholders and delivery partners, we identified sort of 5 key pillars in the definition of our change management process. First is definition, and I know it sounds kind of simplistic, but it's critical that you have defined all of the processes necessary for people to use the product or service that you're offering. They need, all of those touch points between stakeholders need to be defined. There needs to be artifacts. There needs to be ways that you can operate in a way that is consistent and communicated to all of the different individuals who leverage that product. Second is quantification. So this is your value story. When you're building an enterprise service, particularly in an environment where enterprise services might not be the norm, it's critical that we explain to all of the different product managers who are used to having things that they manage what value we're providing, and in a way that is quantifiable so that we can put together KPIs and we can demonstrate at the end of the year that we created value for the overall organization. The next up is the communication. So I would say if you are effectively communicating to the organization, you're communicating both broadly as well as very specifically in depth on certain topics. But the individuals receiving the communication probably think that you're communicating too much. Because at the end of the day, if there's under-communication, you're creating what could be a black box. And the individuals who leverage your product and service will be concerned because they're not going to know what's going on, and that itself creates barriers to adoption. And again, when you're trying to create change in the enterprise culture, it's critical that you eliminate all of those barriers. Finally, next up, standardization. So standardization comes in many different flavors, but it's all around consistency. So if there are existing processes within our organization, we wanted to make sure that we were being consistent with those existing standards, even though we were elaborating on them and creating new ones. But also, when there were things that were core to what we were trying to do, such as data evaluation, that we had everything not only documented in a consistent way, but we also had all of the tools and processes automated in a way that they were repeatable. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is build consistency up front, so at the end that you have comparable results. So with data evaluation, we had test data sets, we have test data harnesses and plans. So at the end of the day, no matter where that data comes from, as long as we're using something that we've already tested from a data type perspective, we can leverage the same test plans that we have in the past, and all of that is automated, so it's a very simple to use process. And finally, allocation. Product managers want to know what the cost is going to be of using your enterprise service. So what we needed to do is put together an allocation model that was consistent, because variation in the cost model creates a lot of confusion, but also that it was mapped to business drivers that the product managers were familiar with. Because at the end of the day, we needed to be as easy to use and as easy to incorporate into their planning as possible.